Okay, good. I have about 40 slides of content. So we've got a fair amount of ground we'll cover, but I want to say my goal is to answer questions that are real time and relevant for you and the clients that you serve. So as we go through this, ask questions. You can put your hand up, you can come off mute, and well, I think there's enough of us. I won't notice if you come off mute. But if you put something in the chat that you have a question, I'll stop periodically to check. Because again, I have found, over the years, the more this is interactive, the more likely it is that you're going to get the content that you need. And I'm happy to speak on a range of topics. So, all right, so we're going to talk about job search success and insights for dealing with our current market. A little bit about me, and it's nice to see some familiar faces. I run the CDCS program for the association. CDCS is essentially our LinkedIn certification program, but we call it Certified Digital Career Strategist because as a coach, LinkedIn is the preeminent tool that job seekers can use. But really, you're thinking not just through how do we make LinkedIn look a certain way, but really working with your clients on how to take advantage of all that LinkedIn can do to help your clients perform as well as possible in the job search process. I'll reference LinkedIn some in this conversation because I think it shows up quite a lot. But yeah, that's really what the CDCS is about. Prior to starting the program with the association, what brought me to that level of expertise or what I do for a living. I am currently the director of talent management for about a $1.5 billion healthcare workforce services company called ProLink. So I manage about 12 to 15 people. My team is talent acquisition, so recruiters. My team hires probably about 100 people every month. And then I also run talent management, university recruiting, succession planning, performance management. They all fall within my domain. Prior to working for ProLink, I was the head of talent acquisition for a tech company in the leadership development space. So they're building teams of recruiters and thinking about the whole recruiting process, onboarding, internal talent mobility, promotions, all of that. And then prior to that, I ran my own staffing company and career coaching company for about 10 years and dealt with everything from individual clients starting as early as high school when we had high school age students thinking about what kind of major to study and what sort of career outcomes all the way through executive level. Coaching for higher ed. I still coach a master's program at Duke and do PhD coaching for organizations in terms of career development for their staff. And then on the staffing side, our niche was small to mid-sized, fast growth companies throughout the US. And then prior to that, 20 years running lines of business for large multi-billion-dollar staffing companies. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I have had a chance to work with job seekers and hiring managers across industries, across sectors, through multiple downturns, through multiple market surges, as well as almost always managing teams of 10 plus reporting into me. So that's what brings me into the conversation, is the hope to share with you what it really looks like from a recruiting and hiring perspective. I certainly know, especially when I was running the career coaching business, one of the things I always thought about was, as I'm giving advice to my clients, does my advice work? Is it still relevant in today's market? Because it's very easy as a coach to get on a track of these words sound good, this advice seems like the right thing, and not necessarily know, is it having a high ROI for my clients of varying abilities when they go looking for a job. So that was part of the reason why I had both coaching and staffing, is I constantly wanted to see, is the advice we give on the coaching side, does it work? And then what do we see working in the job market? Let's change what we're telling people on the coaching side. And then for me personally, I went through 2 job searches over the last couple of years. So, 2 years ago when I decided I was ready to move back into a corporate arena, I had to go through a job search, and I spent about 6 months before I found the right opportunity. And it was not just because I saw something and I applied and they said, yay, let's hire you. It took communication and effort to get there. And then my company that I was at went through 2 rounds of downsizing. And then that's what led to me making the move to my current company. So that's the other piece is I want you to know everything we'll talk about is things that either I've experienced or my teams have seen. So, and then the last piece, I am both a certified professional resume writer. I'm also a careers writer for US News and have been for, I don't know, at least 10 years. So usually I write an article a month. My most recent one was about AI and the future of work. The month prior was about ChatGPT. And in the CDCS program, we'll also talk about ChatGPT's role, both in terms of LinkedIn profile and our work as career coaches. All right, so that's what brings us into our conversation. Our agenda, we're going to talk some about the market. We're going to talk about the recruiting process, why hires are made, why candidates are declined, and then additional Q&A. So let's go first into the market. We'll let you see if anyone have any idea while I am using this picture to define the market. Go ahead and put in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and volunteer, what is this picture and why is it relevant to our market today? That's how everyone feels. Needle in a haystack. Yes, absolutely. It is a challenging market, even in the best of economic conditions, because of volume. There is an enormous volume of job seekers looking and using different technology tools. You get thousands of applicants. So you guys are spot on. So let's talk about what are some of the headlines right now. The first one you likely have all seen, unemployment claims. So last week's unemployment claims, it was 240,000. There's approximately a little over 1.8 million Americans getting unemployment benefits, right? So that seems not so great. The next thing is layoffs. So in March, 90,000 people were laid off and approximately this year, about 168,000 in tech. In 2022, about 15.4 million people were laid off in the US, and we're trending about the same, right? So you see those numbers and that feels pretty dire. But now let's counterbalance it. In March, 236,000 new jobs were created, right? So if we go back, 240,000 unemployment claims, but almost the same amount in terms of new job creation. As an economy in the US, we're still under 4% unemployment, which is full employment. So there are lots of people still working. And in comparison, in 2020, so during COVID, there was 41.7 million layoffs. And so if you go back to, remember the 2022 number was a little over 15 million. 2023 will be about the same. So we're about half of what we saw happen in COVID. So I bring that up because I think a big piece of coaching is helping your clients with their mindset. And by the way, I do this actively with my recruiters. If they go on to go look for candidates with the mindset of this person doesn't exist, or this job is not great, or this pay is terrible, they will almost always find what they went looking for, which will be people that don't want the job, people that say the pay is the problem, or not good people. And the same happens with our clients when they approach the job market. So if they're approaching the job market in terms of there's nothing good going on, everybody is unemployed, I'm not going to find anything, that is a tremendous burden in what is already an exceptionally stressful process, which is job seeking. No matter how qualified and wonderful you are, it is a punch to the gut because every time you reach out, you don't hear back. It feels very personal. So I bring this up because I want all of you to have, yes, there is awareness that some not great things are happening in the market, but I think it's also important to share with your clients that we are still in a robust economy. There are opportunities, but it's going to be about partnering together to help them find those bright spots. So the summary of all of this is latest research, 61% of Americans have layoff anxiety, right? Again, how terrible is that? That the majority of us are worried about being laid off when the numbers actually tell us the majority of us may not necessarily experience that. And I think part of it is, especially for us, we're users of LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is where most of the tech people are. And if you think about tech has had these layers of squeezing and layoffs. And so LinkedIn is hitting you every week with, I haven't been able to find a job, or what to do if I've been laid off. So I think these layers of layoff events are amplified by the amount of communication we get on LinkedIn. So I think, again, being realistic about my clients are experiencing tremendous anxiety, even if it's not likely to impact them. But then also part of what's feeding it is the narrative that's especially perpetuated on LinkedIn. So let me stop there just on some of those concepts. We're going to move into a little bit more about things to know about layoffs, but any questions you guys have on any of those? I'll pause for just a second. All right, so moving on. What to know about layoffs. So this came, Zippia is kind of a research site. I will caution you, and you guys may know this, when you go looking for substantive reporting on some of these topics, sites that put out a lot of content will constantly change their headlines to say 2023. But when you go and actually look at the data, you'll find the data is kind of a combination of things from a range of years. So be conscious of, you'll sometimes see a post saying, this is the stat, but if you actually go look at the stat, see what year it came from. Anyway, Zippia's got their 20 must-know layoff statistics from 2023. I'll tell you, it was a mix of years, but I think they have some good trending information. December and January, biggest months for layoffs. So in general, 12% of layoffs happen in December, about 12% happen in January. So the good news is that we think about our calendar cycle, we've kind of moved out of layoff season. August is the lowest time for layoffs, so about 5% or so in August. Newest employees are laid off first for a host of reasons. One, they're not as entrenched, but two, quite frankly, they're the cheapest to lay off. Because from a severance standpoint, it's a lot cheaper to give a couple weeks to a new employee than potentially to give several months for a longer term employee. And then the job functions that are most at risk, and this is not just because of layoffs, this is in general, anything that can be outsourced or replaced by technology. So if it's something that can be offshored, if it's something that, I'll give you an example, the team that I inherited, they don't use technology a whole lot. They run their business off of Excel spreadsheets. And so one of them was telling me about how calendaring, in terms of scheduling interviews for hiring managers, took up most of her time. And I'm like, you realize you have bookings, and bookings can let you get a calendaring link for anyone that you want. And then you don't have to spend any time on that. And it was just funny. Here's someone who's a recruiting professional. This is like a meat and potatoes type of offering in tech recruiting. And I mean, her brain was like, well, no, I have to do that personally. I'm like, no, you don't. It's just a calendar overlay. So anyone whose jobs have a high component of things that are being replaced by technology, they are at risk of layoffs. It's just important to know that. Now, where hiring is happening, so remember back to that, 240,000 or so new jobs that were created. The breakdown from U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that came out in May about last month had these three sectors as where most of the hiring was happening. And think about it in terms of these had like 40,000 plus jobs in each of these sectors. I bring this up because, again, part of being a coach or working with professionals that are evolving their career is helping them to be open to where there are opportunities or where there's likely to continue to be opportunities. So healthcare, social assistance, professional and business services, leisure, and hospitality. The next grouping was financial, government, construction, followed by manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing, and then retail, trade, mining, and information. By the way, information is where they classify most tech companies. So, so if you think about it, and I think on this particular case, information had like 1,000 new job creation versus healthcare had like 42,000. So I'm not sure of your clients. I know certainly when I was based in the West Coast, most of my clients, if they weren't in tech, were coming to me saying, I want to get into tech, which I understand because there's lots of perks and benefits people hear about tech companies. But the truth is there's not as much job creation going on right there, right now. So just being mindful of that. One other thing too on the layoffs that you guys may or may not have heard, what happens with companies is a couple of things. The market can shift just a little. And so if I'm a large publicly traded tech company, or I'm a tech company who's backed by venture capital, if someone in the ecosystem has a disruption, so either a shrinking in customer base or does some sort of belt tightening, there is tremendous pressure for everyone else to do it too. So a lot of the belt tightening that you saw at a Facebook or a Microsoft is not because those companies are struggling, but it is because their peer group is doing belt tightening. So their board and shareholders say, surely you have some fat. You hired advance of needs. There's probably some places where you can clean house. But when you add media to that and you hear a little belt tightening here and a little belt tightening there, then you get a media cycle that says, oh my gosh, we're having mass layoffs. So that's a lot of what you're experiencing right now is healthy belt tightening that quite frankly happens all the time in companies, but getting publicized because it was important for their shareholders and their boards to see that they were also being good financial stewards of their salary dollars. Now you go downstream and you look at like the venture community. Well, the venture community is looking to get the most money out of where they invested money. So again, they go, well, if someone in my portfolio is having customer issues and needs to tighten belts, well, then I'm going to tell all my other CEOs they need to do the same. And then small businesses, of course, right? Any small shifts in the business does impact their cash flow. When you impact the cash flow and you've had wages going up, you have to look and say, can I continue on this? So that's just a little bit in terms of downsizing. What looks catastrophic can often be things that normally are happening. They're just getting publicized. Okay, so a couple of things you guys may have seen, in-demand skills. So this comes out from LinkedIn Learning. I'm going to talk some more about some trends going on in LinkedIn Learning that I think you should know. But this, when they look at that, it happens where they're pulling this information is both from what types of things employers who use LinkedIn Learning are having their employees watch and learn about. That's one side of it. The other side of it is when they look at job posts and job descriptions, LinkedIn's algorithm goes through and pulls out key themes, and this is what they're coming up with. Now, the caveat here, what's tempting as a coach or what's tempting as a job seeker is you take this list and you go, okay, I'm going to litter my resume and my LinkedIn profile with these words. No recruiter puts in teamwork as a search term to find someone who's qualified. But what happens is when they interview or when they're looking at your accomplishment statements, they're looking for evidence of, were you collaborating and working with people, or were you working in isolation? What kind of communication skills you're exemplifying. So not because you wrote communication skills on your resume or you wrote communication skills on your LinkedIn profile. So you want to interpret these with your clients in terms of people are looking for evidence that you have these skills, but not necessarily the words in and of themselves. And then when we go to the next one, the most in-demand hard skills. So again, this is when they analyze job openings and when they think about their enterprise customers, what types of LinkedIn Learning videos they're consuming. This is what's showing up here. Interesting that customer relationship management and operations, which don't seem as hard skills, are actually in here as well. So anyway, so those are a couple of things, like I said, to be mindful of in terms of trends for if you're authoring content for resumes, LinkedIn profiles, and prepping people for interviews, helping them talk about how these skills came to life in their work or how they have these skills is really important. But just littering the keywords in and of themselves probably won't get them any mileage. All right, we are now going to move into the recruiting process. Any questions just over some of the market trends or information I shared there? No? Okay. All right, the recruiting process. So I like this meme. It makes me laugh. I will tell you, as someone who's interviewed people my whole career, how often this happens, that you think you asked a pointed question that would help someone help themselves, and instead, they go back to something that is not very relevant. So talent acquisition, what goes on in talent acquisition or recruiting? So the first thing is the average job seeker will usually diagnose their resume as the source of their pain, right? So usually when someone says, hey, I'm going to start looking for a job, or I'm having a hard time looking for a job, the number one thing they'll hit first, it must be my resume. And it's funny, even like with my clients, or with some of the students that I coach, the first thing they'll come to me if they're not having job search successes, there's something in my resume that's causing people not to respond. I will remind them, and at least in this most recent job cycle, I have, gosh, and these, I mean, the students I work with are at Duke. And so they got into a top tier data science program. Most had 3 to 5 great years of business experience before coming to Duke. So these are very qualified professionals, and they're applying to about 100 jobs to get about 3 interviews to get to 1 offer. So just to give you a sense of that volume, it's just exploded. But anyway, resume is what people think of first. Then if you're a job seeker, usually after the resume, then you go, okay, great, my resume is good. I'm going to start applying all over the place. And so their next area is, where can I find more jobs to apply to? And then they might start to exert some effort in terms of, can they develop relationships with external recruiters who work at agencies or internal recruiters who work at companies. And then, they will go and use their employee referrals. And that's usually how most job seekers approach the market. Now, the reality is, if you look at this from an employer's perspective, when my hiring managers are looking to hire, the first thing we do is we post internally. And we look to say, is there anyone internally in the company that could be a good fit for the role? And by the way, if you're working with job seekers, the best way that they can change careers is doing it within their internal company first. And downturns are one of the best times to do it. So my team that I just had at the tech company I was at prior to ProLink, I had a team of 6 people. And as we were cutting hiring, I was able to work with each of them, and they each took a role somewhere else in the business. So one went to customer success, one went to IT, one went to client experience, one went to a marketing group of ours. So you can get some of the most transformative changes during wonky markets, because companies would rather try to find something for their own internal talent in a new or creative way. Also, internal candidates are usually ones chosen to create brand new jobs. So you think about a company like ProLink, easily more than half the roles that we're sourcing for now may not have existed a year or 2 ago. So they are a byproduct of growth and new needs coming up. And I think there is all sorts of research that the amount of, if you've got kids in college, the careers they're likely going to have, many of their titles haven't even been created yet. So again, internal candidates are usually where you go to first, followed by employee referrals, followed by using our internal TA team to source, or external recruiters, and then looking at your online applications. Why some of this? And then, of course, you get these pieces and then you look at the resume, right? So it's just an interesting counterbalance. We spend all this energy on the resume when in fact it's getting seen is probably where the energy needs to go. The resume has to do its job, but getting seen is of equal or greatest importance. So now, why are referrals so beneficial? 1, there's a trust factor. 2, there's a workflow simplicity factor. And I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like. JobVite, their research shows referrals are 5 times more likely than the average applicant to get hired, and 15 times more than an applicant who found the job versus a posting. Now, if you're like me, at first I was like, well, who else is there if it's not the people who found it posting? But I think they mean as opposed to someone who the recruiter might have gone searching for, or they participated in university recruiting or something else. And then 78% of recruiters feel that referrals are the best way to find candidates. They have better job satisfaction, they stay with the company longer. Why? Because there's some trust, inherent trust that comes from that referral. And the hope would be the referral has a better idea of the company and the role. So when they're saying yes, it's a more meaningful yes. And there's some skin in the game, so they're not looking to be flaky if their friend referred them. So let me stop for a second. I know I've got a question. Let me address a couple of, okay. Approximately what percentage of time does the internal candidate get the job? In other words, is it rare or uncommon for external candidates to beat out internal? And that's a great question. I don't have a percentage for you. I will tell you it changes based on the level. And what often happens in large companies, like again, you take our company is a recruiting and sales driven company. So we have a plethora of recruiting and sales folks, most of whom won't be able to just make a jump over to IT or just make a jump over to a marketing role that's more senior level. So what often happens is the sales professionals or the recruiters will move into the entry level roles in these different functions. But when we need the next level up role, we won't normally have someone that can move to more of that kind of mid or expert level. but it doesn't mean they can't. So if someone is intentional, and that's one of the things that, I work with in terms of internal mobility, is how when you can start when people are entry level and think about their long-term goals and help them get the training and the development they need to be qualified for something that isn't just entry level. So great question, Edward. And I think like I said, it'll depend in terms of the amount of other entry level roles that you have versus more expert roles. All right, so now let's also talk about visibly why referrals jump out so much. This is a screenshot of one applicant tracking system, and I've worked in quite a few. This one that you're looking at is Greenhouse. That yellow area that you see there, that is if someone was a referral, that's where I would see it. So if I am looking at a list of 200, 300, 400 plus applicants, if they're referrals, that jumps out to me. And chances are I'm going to come in, and even with in the company I'm right now, we're building an applicant tracking system from scratch. And so one of the things that, my team comes in every day is they come in and they look at new applications, but they filter them by those that were referrals because they'll always contact the referrals first. So that just gives you a sense of both visibly how it stands out, not to mention we've already talked from a trust standpoint and from a likelihood to be satisfied with the job and say yes. Referrals, just they show up and have a profound impact in a lot of different ways. And then one other lens of this is a deeper dive into Greenhouse. And you can see, let's go back. You can see in here, this is how the resume would show up. So if I chose to look at my referred candidates, then I come in and it's got the resume uploaded here. And so if you see, as an example, if this top part doesn't catch my attention, I'm not going to bother to actually open up the resume and look any deeper. So for all of you that are resume writers and you talk with your clients about the importance of this top part really catching the attention and speaking to the audience, you want to make sure that works. In addition, if you have a job changing client, making sure it speaks to that, right? So in other words, don't speak about the work that they used to do if they're trying to apply for a new thing, or be forthright about looking to pivot or looking to take my skills learned in this area to add value in this new area. Speak to it right there because it helps to get the attention so the reader doesn't go, wait, did they just send me a resume that's not related? And where I see this a lot is, we'll get people, for example, applying for a recruiting role and they'll send a resume that's all about customer service. My recruiters aren't going to touch them because they're going to say, look, if they're hoping for a customer service job that doesn't have kind of a pay performance type of, slant to it, they're not going to want this job. And even if they say yes, we're assuming they're saying yes because they need a job, not because they want it. So not having that show up here is going to impact our recruiting team looking at them. All right. Let's see. Someone has I read somewhere that's saying pivot or transitioning detracts from a candidate's consideration. I don't know how someone would know that. Now, what I will tell you is every recruiter will first take someone who's currently doing the job that they're applying for. And by the way, so would all of us. If you, taken the CDCS program and you've attended some of our monthly Q&A, time, one of the things I always mention is the fact that any of us, if we were hiring for someone, right? If you needed to have a surgeon remove something, are you going to take someone who's pivoting into that kind of surgery or someone who's done the surgery before? All of us are going to put our hand up and say, we're going to take someone who's done before. Now, there could be reasons why you might make that risk, right? Cost. Like you'll see people, for example, that will go to Mexico to get surgeries that they're like, I'd rather get in the US, but it's cost prohibitive. I need to get it done. So I'll go to a market where someone maybe has similar credentials, but not exactly the same. Referral. So you might say, oh, I normally wouldn't want to go to this person for this, but 5 of my friends have used them and have said, this is absolutely who you want. Expediency. You need to get something done right away. And this person's available versus there's risk for waiting for someone else who's more qualified. Proximity, right? It might be too much to go get to someone and someone nearby. That is the same for hiring. And I think, again, it's helpful to share this with your clients because if they're approaching the process as they're in a battle with this recruiter in this company that can't see their true value versus understanding they too would not hire themselves if they had someone who was qualified, helps them to start to make the mind shift of, my job is to show why I'm a safer hire or why I'm worth investing in, not the let me be angry at the person that they won't give me a chance. Okay. So great question. So the words pivot or transitioning, even in and of themselves, yeah, if I had someone who's perfectly qualified versus someone who's pivoting or transitioning, I might go with that, or most likely. But if you're going to be pivoting or transitioning, owning it or talking about how your past could make sense in my arena is better than not addressing it at all. All right, moving forward. And then one last thing, you will read so many things on LinkedIn about the mythical powers of the ATS and how it finds your keywords and how it ranks you. Again, I'll tell you, I have worked with probably more recruiters than most anyone you'll ever meet. There are very few ATSs that have that power. Now, recruiters may very well do a keyword search, and there certainly are applicant tracking systems that will rank candidates based on keyword matching, and LinkedIn does the same. But it really isn't some crazy thing. It's no different than when you go do a Yelp search to try to find a Chinese food restaurant versus any restaurant. That's usually the level that it's happening. Again, there are some tools that get way more intricate, but by and large, most of the market is not playing and working in those tools. So it's meant to be logical. It's meant to be, what's our fastest way of winnowing down hundreds of applicants to get to a critical few so we have time to actually look at them. All right, so let me stop. And by the way, the screenshot you're seeing here is when a keyword search was done. So in this case, I did the keyword search of greenhouse, which is an applicant tracking system, because if I was going to be hiring for a recruiter to work in a small tech company, instead of looking at 400 applications, I'd look for the ones that had used greenhouse, because I know you only use greenhouse in a small tech company. So I'd already know they'd have some similarity and experience in my market. All right, let me address a couple of the questions that we have. All right, do you recommend any particular format for the top third that allows them to quickly identify an applicant for a position? Also, I've heard some recruiters say that they don't want the blurb about what the applicant does above the bullet points. Is this something you prefer to see? So just like art, this is all totally subjective, right? So you're going to talk to 100 different recruiters, you'll get 100 different answers. What I will tell you that all recruiters are doing is they are looking for evidence that this person is less risky than someone else, or a safe way, or will make them look good, or has a high likelihood that the hiring manager will say, I see why you sent me this person. So now, if that shows up in terms of above or below a bullet or how that's written, you're going to get different preferences there. But the key is, does the wording have a purpose in showing that the person matches the job for which they're applying? That's your number one piece. And make sure important stuff is at the top, because, right, we've got to see the top. So in other words, don't waste a third with their header, which doesn't offer any value other than, obviously make sure you have good contact information, but get to what's relevant. So for example, with my students, if the strongest thing they've done is attend Duke and their courses, then we make sure that's there. But if their coursework wasn't that profound, but they've had some really great internships, we get that up there. Or if their internships weren't that great, but their projects are more meaningful, we're going to get that up there, right? So there's a bit of a continuum we're trying to work from. All right, next questions. Would core competency column work better in this case, right under the summary part? You certainly could. I will tell you, a lot of core competencies are complete BS, because they're filled with things like teamwork and leadership. And to me, that's a waste of real estate, because I don't believe you because you wrote it there. Now, if you told me that you led the working employees ERG, well, that's leadership, and that's something very specific that might be of interest, or, employee resource groups might be very important to me. Or, if you told me that you ran a department of 50 people with 6 direct reports, okay, that's very specific. So I like core competencies. I just caution you, don't put too many and don't make them useless, because no recruiter goes looking for things like communication or teamwork. Give me something specific or something very relevant. And then, yes, it could be totally fine. And here's the benefit. And by the way, when I would build resumes, I did build a core competency section with explicit instructions to my clients. These change every time you apply. to reflect the concepts that you think will make you most competitive for this role. So don't set it and forget it. And don't have more than, I mean, I usually much more than 6 don't really stand out after that. All right, can you comment on the multi-column resume format, which looks very popular? Here's the issue with the multi-column or graphic resume is most unsophisticated applicant tracking systems can't grab need to have content outside of what they deem as the one primary table. So it means, right, if I'm running something down the gutter with information, and then I have my contact information in a header, and then I have a main table or body, a lot of applicant tracking systems will only look in the body to pull what it needs. So it might, for example, miss my email address, or if I ran my education on the left, it might not be able to find it. Now, these tools are getting better and better and better. So it becomes less and less of an issue. But I never did multi-column resumes because I told my clients, I don't want to take the risk that you apply to a company and you get missed. Because recruiters don't go look at the exception piles. They just start with what uploaded that morning or yesterday, and they start working through them. So I always went safe because I didn't want someone to be overlooked. And that doesn't look as fancy as people that do graphic resumes, but I know they need to be seen. And so for me, I'd rather they be seen than someone go, wow, you really designed your resume in a beautiful way. For an older worker, another question, is it worth mentioning that you're better hire because you'll stay in your position longer and not a stepping stone? So recruiters 100% look for tenure and promotion in roles. So the nice thing is, it's not that your age tells me that, it's what am I seeing on your resume? And by the way, I'm going to show you a LinkedIn screenshot, which will also, LinkedIn puts that your tenure or your promotion in a role, it puts it as one of the reasons why you're a stronger candidate than someone who's moved around. So the narrative is correct, but I wouldn't necessarily bracket it to my age. I would bracket it to, I have a track record, or I demonstrate that I sink into something and find ways to keep adding value. And recruiters absolutely vet and screen for that. Next question. What is the benefit in developing an ATS-friendly resume for an executive client who feels that he'll be just handing the resume over or recruited directly for the role? Yeah, so executives, here's what's interesting. You can find, like, again, I was doing a chief revenue officer search for the tech company I worked for. We were getting applicants off board. So these are applicants, by the way, making $500,000, $600,000, right? So most of us would say, wow, that person makes a lot of money, and they had no problem at all applying online, going to job boards to look for jobs. So I think the first thing is, helping your client move beyond, I'm an executive, I'm treated differently. You may, but you may also work for a company that has you go through some sort of technology process. So why do you want to miss out? And so in other words, I don't think, Melissa, that they have to be incongruent. I think you can have a very effective executive resume that also plays well within an applicant tracking system. But I always ask my clients, tell me about how you're going to look for a job. So if they're working all off their network, or they have an executive search firm working with them, we have a totally different audience than someone who's mostly going to be applying to strangers, right? So in their case, they get an introduction first, and then the resume opens up a conversation, or it helps their search firm tell their story. So then the resume has a different audience. So I think start first with what is the audience for this? And maybe you have 2 resumes, right? Maybe you have the one that helps to tell the story, and the one that when you need something to be uploaded accomplishes that. So great question. All right. Okay, moving on. And we have about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to pick up the pace, but I love all the questions. So, all right. So last thing, when we talk about recruiters, things to be mindful of. First and foremost, they're high volume, no different than a college admissions folks. As much as they say it's a holistic process, we look at everybody. I do not believe they look at everybody. I believe they have consideration points that everybody gets filtered through, which then gives them a subgroup that actually gets looked at. Recruiting is the same. There are filter points, and then people look at them. So what happens once you made it through the filter point, the rest of the things we have here, they make or break the difference as to whether you get from the recruiting screen to an offer. Responsiveness. So again, I don't have personal attachment to whether, if I talk to Karen first and then Darla and Stephanie, if I liked all 3, but Darla makes it super easy for me to get her scheduled and responds to me. If my hiring manager only has 2 interview slots, Darla's getting it. Now, it's pretty rare that, so if I have multiple qualified candidates, whoever is the most responsive, whoever makes it easy for me as a recruiter tends to get first opportunities to meet, tends to get follow-up. Especially again, people that are polite. And, I look forward to talking to them. Darla makes it seem like she values the work that I'm doing. I'm going to nudge a little bit for her because I've liked working with her. Intentional communication. So I just sat in, we just did a round of internship interviews. And so I, interviewed 5 candidates. And what I found happening is quite a few of them couldn't get to the point because they hadn't thought through what they wanted to accomplish with their communication. And in 30 minutes, if you waste 10 minutes, you just gave up a third of the time you had to sell me on why you're going to get hired. And so it was no coincidence that the 2 we liked the most were the most intentional. So yes, they gave us color so we could get a sense of them. But instead of giving us all sorts of extra details that don't make us think they're more qualified or less qualified, they got to the point and they made their conversation relevant. So being intentional. Fast vetting. So most recruiters want to move through things quickly. So again, being available to do these things gives you an advantage. Your candidacy reflects on them. So I think that's important, right? My team, every person they send to a hiring manager, if they don't perform well, believe me, I get a call saying, hey, why isn't your team sending us good people? So my team is looking for candidates that reflect well on them. So, make sure you're doing that. And if you work well with a recruiter, they can be a key ally and a resource. You can ask them, hey, what's been missing from other people? Or what things can I do to be prepared? And they'll tell you, because most recruiters like people. That's why we're in the business. And we don't want to talk to 20 people if we could talk to 2 great ones. So use them as your ally, and your recruiter can be an X factor for success. So now we are going to jump into why a hire is made. Let me just see if there's any other, how important is page length, especially for an executive? So on those resumes, usually 2 pages. I think most of the research tells us 2 pages, because you don't want to put so much on a resume that you have nothing to talk about or someone rules you out. Because here's the deal. You ask recruiters, they'll say more pages. Why? Because it gives me more chances to rule you out. So I don't think anyone really needs more than 2 pages, but they can provide supplemental information if someone needs it and that's on resume length. All right, why a hire's made. Number one thing I can tell you, anyone know what KYA is? You can put it in the chat. Know your audience, absolutely. I appreciate the someone who put kiss your. Yes, but it is know your audience, 100%, right? So why people get noticed. And I broke these into 3 clusters. The first is they know someone who knows how to represent them for a role. So what I mean by that is it's a referral, right? So it means if I have an opening and Karen comes to me and says, hey, Robin, you need to meet Melissa. She's perfect for your role. I'm already 80% there. So really it's Melissa's role to lose versus hers to gain. Second is they know someone who can create a job for them. So, I always find it interesting. I love the fact that people have gotten the message that they should reach out to people if they don't know someone, but don't reach out to someone who can't create a job for you. So if there's an opening, that's one thing. If there's not an opening, recognize that. I used to tell people, I ran a small business. Most of the jobs that I had were created because I got introduced to somebody that I go, ooh, they could make my business better. And I created something for them. So if I did that in a 15-person company, imagine what that looks like on a large company. But encourage your clients, know people that actually own a profit and loss statement, because they are the only one that can get money to solve a problem. Or they know someone who can get them introduced. And then when they get that introduction, they're good at selling themselves. So those are probably the first 3 people that get in process. Next are qualified people. So people that have done the role or role slightly less than this role, or people that have done the role or role slightly more advanced. So this is where when someone's doing keyword searching, they look at referrals, and then they start to look at people that have done this job before. And by the way, LinkedIn reinforces that like nobody's business. Next, they understand the role in the company. They can represent themselves well to a hiring manager or executive. This is the direct outreach. And honestly, it's how I got my last 2 jobs, because I knew on paper, like the first job I was applying for, I'm coming from CEO of my company. I knew no talent acquisition professional is going to pick me to be their internal, head of TA. So I reached out to the chief people officer I report to and said, I have applied. Chances are I'm not going to read the way that your TA team is looking for, but let me tell you why I'm interested. And I did the exact same thing with the role that I'm in as well now. And I reflected that I understood the role in the company, and that's what led to them going, oh, okay, I should talk to the person. And then last is you can understand the role in the company, and then you can get an employee or a recruiter who can advocate for you. So I bring this up because, again, I think most people's initial reaction is they apply and they go, oh, I'll reach out to the recruiter. The recruiter doesn't necessarily move the needle if they didn't already think you were qualified or if they were too busy. These other people will move the needle. Now, this is where I was talking about LinkedIn's reinforcement. And by the way, on ChatGPT is a reinforcement of things that already exist. And so one of the things, and then LinkedIn does the same thing. So what do I mean by that? This is a screenshot. I took this yesterday. I went into LinkedIn Recruiter and I said, okay, I want to go look for marketing coordinators. So I put in marketing coordinators in Ohio, and LinkedIn tells me there are 932 people in Ohio that have your title, and 201 meet your requirements. Now, by the way, I haven't put any other requirements in than marketing coordinator and Ohio. So, but what I'm bringing up is it's just helping you understand what someone who's not currently in the right title is up against. So tools like LinkedIn, go find the people with the title to market to a recruiter. Doesn't mean it's insurmountable. I just want you to be aware of it, that it's coming from the work experience that they have in this particular case. All right, so now let's talk about how to stand out, but I'm going to answer some questions we have here. What's your take on cover letters and their benefits? Yeah, cover letters, and it's like all the research you read, it's sometimes 6 in one and half a dozen the other, right? Some people might read them first. Some people like you first, and then they read the cover letter. Some don't look at them at all. I will tell you, most recruiters don't have time to see the cover letter of everybody. So unless your cover letter is instantly calling out that you're a referral of somebody, it may not be seen unless your resume is already getting them to look at you. But I use cover letters as evidence of, can they write, or did they get someone to write for them? So I'm amazed at how many people that are semi-qualified submitting cover letters with errors and issues. What they certainly don't need to be as long, because if they're more than about a half page, 2/3, they're not being read. So don't repeat your whole resume on them. So I think writing a paragraph, a couple of bullets, and then a closing paragraph is probably all you need to do. But don't let your clients spend hours customizing cover letters, because I'd rather they spend hours trying to meet people or doing outreach. That is more effective than a cover letter. All right, ways to stand out. Great communication. So it's funny, every time a new innovation comes out like ChatGPT, people are like, is this the death of communication? And I will tell you, it is not. I write all day long. I write on Teams. I write on, projects. I put comments in documents. So learning how to write where I can be to the point, it's intentional, it evokes the right response or reaction, has never been more important than ever before, because we get less space to do it in. So great communication skills, succinct to the point, how you structure it, right? Everything from even like sending a response to something and saying, there's 2 important things I want you to know. It's 1 and it's 2, right? I'm getting readability. But so when you're job seeking, your writing is important, not just in your resume, but in your LinkedIn, but in your correspondence back to recruiters, your hiring managers. Whoever can connect their experience and their qualifications to their business needs wins, right? It's someone actively thinking through, here's what I've done, here's what you need, here's how they work together. The next bucket is someone who makes the most of your time together. You have so little time in the interview process. Be intentional. And again, as coaches, I do a lot of interview training, and I do a lot of, what do you think they're going to ask you about? How can we figure that out by looking at the job descriptions or your previous discussions? And now, what will your answers to this be? Someone who's also organized, takes notes, gives them the ability to follow up, connect dots, suggest solutions. So those things make a huge difference in someone getting selected. They can demonstrate their impact. They can advocate for themselves. So they're coming across as easy to manage. And by the way, asking questions helps to show that, and that they seem accountable and coachable. So these things all the time when we get interview feedback, and it doesn't matter for what role, these traits are what makes someone more likely to rise to the top. All right, we're gonna go through some of these pieces. I just wanted you to see, for example, this is a screenshot of a profile on LinkedIn. So back to talking about relevance. Again, like with the marketing coordinator role or another role, it's showing you here that this person is 4 out of 8 of a match to my job post. So it's talking about the skills that this person has on their profile, and then its interpretation of my job post and what skills are necessary. I bring this up to you because, again, one of the things we deal with in CDCS is really talk about skills selection and how things show up. And LinkedIn is really pushing this to their enterprise customers. The idea of if you're using a recruiting tool or something else, matching and getting preferential treatment by skills. So that's a really important one if you're hoping to show up on LinkedIn, but again, just speaking to relevance. All right, I'm going to jump through just to candidates, why they're declined, just based on where we are in time. All right, this picture here. How does this picture make you feel? Anyone have any idea what I'm trying to convey there? Go ahead and put in the chat, and that'll let me look at some of the questions really quickly. Does LinkedIn read a skills bank in the about section? No, I do not think when they're talking about that skills match that I just showed you, I think they're really pulling from skills and those skills being tied to your work experience, not the keywords. But if someone does a Boolean or keyword search, then what you have in your about section and headline definitely works. Someone asked about open to work, and I think it's a mixed bag. In terms of, some people, if you're looking to hire right away, open to work folks makes you super happy. I do have to say personally, for more senior folks, someone could interpret it as we just know people are attracted to people that aren't available, right? It's like kind of a human need for us. So I think if you're in a more senior position, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do the open to work as a frame. Because I think there's a chance that it may subliminally make someone not as interested. Okay, so someone, thank you for the suggestions on what this picture is. This picture is about a hidden secret in terms of hiring. Hiring is about minimizing risk. The world thinks hiring is about finding perfection. It's not. As someone whose entire career has been about hiring as a business function is the least risky way to spend salary dollars. So I go looking for people we like, but people that are likely to not fall apart or turn out to be a bad hire. Why does that matter? Because when you're working with your clients, it's looking for things that are risky and helping them address it, such as a gap in employment, such as not having recent or relevant experience, such as a termination or lack of tenure, because they need to speak to those and address and try to minimize them, so that it doesn't stick in someone as a barrier. Okay, so now, why don't people get hired? One, they're just not seen, right? And so that's probably the hardest thing. And while it's a simple concept, it's not easy, right? How do you get seen among hundreds? Yes, you have to have a good resume, but you also have to be a connector and reach out to people and try to draw the right attention to yourself. When you start, once you're in an engagement with someone, people that are not proactive and lack intention perform poorly. And we hear this all the time. People will get into an interview, and when they're pushed a little bit about why they want a particular role or why they're a good fit, their answers don't hold up. Or things like they just quit a role without something lined up. Really? You didn't have intention around that? Or they want something without really knowing why they want it, right? They want it for a superficial reason and can't speak to it. So at the very least, and I hate to say this, teach them to embellish a little bit, not embellish about their experience, but speak to your audience, right? So if you're interviewing for a sales role and you're saying you don't want something with a lot of pressure, you're not getting hired then, right? So you have to find a way. You might not want a lot of pressure, but that is outweighed by the benefits you think a pay for performance job can give you. So teach them how to speak to their desire for that pay for their performance. So they can still be honest, but they're not showing that they're lacking intention. They can't connect their value to the business need, right? So in other words, the interview interactions are not a good use of time. They're not compelling or convincing. They don't understand the company, the role, or the team. They're careless. So careless in terms of, I hear stories of people talking over people, people getting on a one track and not able to evolve, people having typos, missing, appointments, not looking for things. So when carelessness shows up in the interview process, it's almost always a no-go. Their judgment doesn't align. So them being able to read good social cues of those around them. I've had candidates not get hired because they swore in an interview. They couldn't evolve their approach based on who they were talking to. They feel untrustworthy. So anything, and this is where LinkedIn can show up sometimes too, you might reflect something on a resume that's customized and have something different on LinkedIn. And someone's like, are you trying to hide something? So, part of what we deal with as CDCS is we spend time talking about how LinkedIn pairs with your resume and reinforces a story without opening you up to seem like you're misrepresenting something. And then they seem uncomfortable with tech, change, hard work, collaboration, or growth. So their inability to move forward or have a growth mindset. And then finally, they seem hard to coach, like they'll require extra work or they're risky. So those are the main reasons why. And so, essentially, this is all about someone's got to demonstrate their fit by looking at, the descriptions, the requirements, the extras of the role, and tying them to their background. Okay, so I'm going to get to questions. We have a few minutes left. Just a quick reminder for you guys, if you have not participated in the CDCS program and you are interested, I blend not just LinkedIn, but a whole lot of my insights from being a recruiter, so that the LinkedIn training that we do is not about how to make LinkedIn flashy and have all sorts of images. It's how to truly coach your clients so that their LinkedIn can work for them. And then a third of our time is spent on all the research and things you can do with LinkedIn that I find very often most people don't know, that can help to arm them so they can stand out, so they can prepare, so that they connect. And so if you're interested, if you use the Robin 10 code, and I think it's got to be used by this Sunday, you get 10% off. And that's where you'd register. All right, so let me get to some of the questions. Thank you guys so much. I know we covered a lot. My understanding is this is recorded, so I'll let the association speak to how you'll be able to access it again. But let me get to some questions. All right, so we talked about LinkedIn, open to work, moving on down. How important is the about section? So to me, the about section is your story. So I love it because if I'm looking at a bunch of people, having a thoughtful about section gives me some insight into them. And I found even from recruiting, I get to what we need to do really quickly, but I usually will bring up one or two things that I hope will help the other person connect with me or stand out. So whether it's, hey, I like to make, I make honey as a side hobby. Or, hey, I noticed, part of interviewing these days is to have interesting art or something in the background to get somebody to talk, just a little bit about it so you stand out. You can use your about section that way, right? Have the important pieces, but if there's one or two things that are interesting in terms of why you might be interested in a certain role or your past, I think that helps you to stand out. Next question. Oh, we talked about that. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh, good. Okay, so we are almost done. Let me pause. Stephanie, you might have any wrap up. And then if anyone else has any other questions, put them in the chat, or now is your time. And by the way, my email's on there. My LinkedIn profile's on there. So if you have questions after this, feel free to shoot me a message. All right, Steph, go ahead.
Thanks. No, that was a great webinar. I really appreciate all the information you provided. And I did take CDCS myself last year. It's an amazing program. So I highly recommend it if you're working on LinkedIn profiles for your clients. If you guys have any trouble signing up for CDCS, you can email me. I will put my email in the chat. You can reach me there. Give me about a day to respond, and we'll make sure you're all set up for CDCS. And I believe it starts May 17th, correct? Yes, May 17th.
A week from this Wednesday, absolutely.
Yes, there we go. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Robin, thanks again, and we'll see you next week.